The thunder of hooves against the hard-packed earth came to a sudden halt as Levi Turner reined in his stallion at the deserted train station. Through the swirling dust and fading light of dusk, he spotted a solitary figure huddled on the platform bench. A woman, her shoulders hunched against the bitter October wind, sat amidst a meager pile of luggage. No one else was in sight at this remote Nevada outpost. No stationmaster, no waiting family, not even a passing traveler. Just a lone woman, abandoned as the last train disappeared over the horizon. Nevada Territory, 1868. Levi dismounted, his spurs jingling against the weathered boards of the platform as he approached. The woman's head jerked up at the sound, revealing a face streaked with dust and silent tears. Her emerald eyes widened with a mixture of hope and fear. "Train's gone," Levi stated plainly, adjusting his worn Stetson. "Won't be another for 3 days." She nodded mutely, clutching a small leather bag in her trembling hands. Her dress, once fine but now creased and travel-worn, suggested she had journeyed far. "You got someone coming for you?" he asked, scanning the empty horizon stretching toward the jagged mountains. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was meant to meet someone, but—" Levi had seen her type before. Eastern women lured west by promises that evaporated like morning dew under the harsh reality of frontier life. The territory had no patience for the unprepared. Without another word, he gathered her 2 small trunks and the carpet bag resting beside her. The woman opened her mouth as if to protest but seemed to think better of it. Night was approaching, and with it, the bone-chilling cold of the desert. "Name's Levi Turner," he said simply, loading her belongings onto his horse. "Rebecca Montgomery," she replied, rising unsteadily to her feet. Levi nodded once, then extended his hand to help her onto his stallion. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted, allowing him to lift her onto the horse before he swung up behind her. Without further explanation, he turned the horse toward his ranch, 6 miles east of the station. Rebecca sat rigid in front of him, her back barely touching his chest despite the horse's rhythmic gait. The scent of lavender clung faintly to her hair, incongruous against the dusty landscape surrounding them. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible above the steady hoof beats. "My place," Levi answered. "Got a spare room. You can stay till the next train." It was the most words he'd strung together in months, and he fell silent again, focusing on the darkening trail ahead. The woman Rebecca didn't respond, but he felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. As they rode, Levi considered the strange turn his solitary day had taken. He'd gone to the station to mail a letter and check for a package of seeds he'd ordered, never expecting to return with a passenger. Especially not an obviously educated Eastern woman who looked as out of place in the Nevada Territory as a rose in a cactus patch. Rebecca's mind raced as the stranger's horse carried them further from the station. She had been so certain that Henry would be waiting for her, his letters filled with promises of marriage and a comfortable life together in his substantial Western home. 6 months of correspondence had led to this moment, arriving at a desolate whistle stop with no Henry in sight. The cowboy behind her had barely spoken 10 words, yet something about his quiet demeanor made her trust him more than Henry's flowery letters ever had. His calloused hands held the reins with practiced ease, his presence solid and unwavering at her back. The landscape around them had transformed into a silvery tableau under the rising moon by the time a structure emerged from the darkness. Not the crude shack Rebecca had envisioned, but a proper ranch house built of stout logs with a wide porch and chimneys sending smoke signals into the night sky. "Home," Levi said simply, slowing his horse to a walk as they approached. A dog's deep bark greeted them, followed by the appearance of a large, shaggy beast that bounded toward the horse with evident joy. "That's just Jasper," Levi explained as Rebecca instinctively pressed back against him. He's friendly. He dismounted first, then lifted her down with surprising gentleness. Her legs, stiff from the long train journey and subsequent ride, nearly buckled beneath her. Levi's strong hands steadied her briefly before he turned to unload her luggage. "Come on," he said, leading the way to the house with her trunks. Getting cold. The interior of Levi's home surprised Rebecca even more than its exterior. Clean and orderly, with handcrafted furniture and shelves lined with books, it spoke of permanence and care. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting warm light across polished floorboards. "Spare rooms this way," Levi said, carrying her trunks down a short hallway. "Bathrooms out back. There's water heating on the stove if you want to wash up." Rebecca followed him into a small but comfortable bedroom furnished with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a chest of drawers, and a washstand with a mirror above it. "Thank you, Mr. Turner," she said quietly as he set down her belongings. I can pay for your trouble." Levi shook his head. "No need. Supper's in about an hour if you're hungry." With that, he left her alone, closing the door softly behind him. Rebecca sank onto the bed, the events of the day crashing over her in waves. Henry's absence, the strange cowboy's unexpected kindness, the uncertain future stretching before her, it was all too much. Tears she'd fought to contain now flowed freely. In the kitchen, Levi added more potatoes to the stew simmering on the stove. He wasn't accustomed to company, particularly not a woman's. For years of solitary living since returning from the war had made him awkward around people, preferring the straightforward company of his cattle and horse. But leaving her at that station hadn't been an option, not with night coming on and the nearest town 20 miles away. He set 2 bowls on the table, wondering what had brought Rebecca Montgomery to this remote corner of Nevada. Whatever her story, it wasn't his business. She needed shelter for a few days, and he could provide that much. The floorboards creaked, announcing her presence before she appeared in the doorway. She'd removed her travel coat and hat, revealing honey-colored hair pulled back in a simple knot. Her face, freshly washed, showed faint freckles across her nose and cheekbones. "Something smells wonderful," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Levi gestured toward the table. "Just stew. Nothing fancy." They ate in silence for several minutes before Rebecca spoke again. "I should explain why I was at the station." "No need," Levi replied, breaking off a piece of cornbread. "I'd like to," she insisted. "I owe you that much for your kindness." Levi met her gaze, then nodded once. "I came to marry a man named Henry Williams," she began, her fingers worrying the edge of her napkin. "We'd been corresponding through a matrimonial advertisement. He described himself as a successful rancher near Silver Creek. Said he'd meet me at the station today." Levi's expression remained neutral, but something hardened in his eyes. "Henry Williams from Silver Creek?" Rebecca nodded, hope flickering across her face. "You know him?" "Know of him," Levi said carefully. "His place is about 30 miles northwest. He's not what I'd call a rancher, though. Got a small spread and big debts from what I hear." Rebecca's face fell. "Oh, could be he was delayed," Levi offered, though he didn't believe it himself. "Perhaps," she whispered. But her eyes told him she'd already realized the truth. Henry Williams had never intended to meet her. After supper, Levi built up the fire while Rebecca insisted on washing the dishes. The domesticity of the scene struck him as oddly comfortable despite its unfamiliarity. When she'd finished, she joined him by the hearth, her hands extended toward the flames. "What will you do now?" he asked, breaking the companionable silence. Rebecca sighed. "I don't know. I spent nearly everything I had on the train ticket. I have some savings, but..." She trailed off, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. You've got skills? Training? I was a schoolteacher in Philadelphia, she answered. And I worked in my father's bookshop before he passed. Levi nodded thoughtfully. Silver Creek's looking for a teacher. School's been closed since Miss Peterson got married last spring. Hope brightened her features. Really? Do you think they might consider me? Worth asking, he said with a slight shrug. I can take you into town when the weather clears. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows and sending a thin whistle through the chimney. Rebecca hugged herself against a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. Levi merely nodded and used to gratitude. Best get some rest. Been a long day. That night, as Rebecca lay beneath the warm quilt in the spare room, she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the low moan of the wind, the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance, the creaking of the house settling. So different from the constant bustle of Philadelphia. Yet there was something peaceful about it, something that whispered of possibility rather than loss. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Rebecca woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and the sound of Levi moving about the kitchen. She dressed quickly in her simplest day dress and pinned her hair in a practical style before joining him. Morning, he greeted, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon across the table toward her. Sleep all right? Better than I expected, she admitted, accepting the steaming cup of coffee he offered. You're up early. Ranch work, he explained. Cattle don't feed themselves. After breakfast, Levi donned his coat and hat. I'll be out working the herd today. Make yourself at home. There's books if you get bored. Rebecca watched from the window as he rode out, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. There was something compelling about him, his quiet strength, his simple kindness offered without expectation of return. So unlike the flowery promises in Henry's letters that had turned out to be nothing but empty words. Left alone in a stranger's home, Rebecca decided to make herself useful. She explored the house thoroughly, noting the practical organization of Levi's belongings. Everything had its place, yet the home lacked the touches that made a house truly lived in. No pictures on the walls, no mementos displayed, nothing personal beyond the necessities. She spent the morning cleaning, grateful for the physical activity to distract her mind from her predicament. By noon, the floors gleamed and fresh bread baked in the oven, filling the house with a homey scent she hoped Levi wouldn't mind. When he returned mid-afternoon, the surprise on his face was evident as he stepped through the door. You didn't have to do all this, he said, looking around at the freshly swept floors and polished furniture. I wanted to, Rebecca replied. It seemed a small way to thank you. Levi removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. Smells good. I hope you don't mind that I used some of your flour and lard. I made bread and a pie with those dried apples I found. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Been a while since I had homemade pie. They settled into an unexpected companionship over the next 2 days. Rebecca kept the house while Levi worked his ranch, and they shared quiet meals where conversation gradually became easier. She learned he'd fought for the Union, returning home to Pennsylvania only to find his parents dead from influenza and the family farm sold for taxes. With nothing to keep him there, he'd headed west with his army pay, eventually settling in Nevada where land was cheap and neighbors few. For his part, Levi discovered that Rebecca was the daughter of a bookseller who had fallen on hard times. After her father's death, teaching had been her only option to support herself. When her school closed due to lack of funds, the matrimonial advertisement had seemed like providence. On the third morning, Levi announced at breakfast, "Weather's holding. We can head to Silver Creek today if you're ready." Rebecca nodded, hiding her mixed feelings. Part of her was eager to begin rebuilding her life, yet another part had grown comfortable in this unexpected sanctuary. "I'll hitch up the wagon," Levi said, rising from the table. "Town's too far for riding double with your things." The journey to Silver Creek took nearly 2 hours, the wagon bumping along the rutted trail that passed for a road. As they approached the town, Rebecca felt her anxiety rising. What if there was no teaching position after all? What if the townspeople wouldn't accept an Eastern woman suddenly appearing in their midst? Silver Creek proved larger than she'd expected, a proper town with a main street lined with businesses, a church spire visible above the rooftops, and children playing in the schoolyard of a small white building. Levi guided the wagon to a stop in front of a storefront labeled Peterson's General Store and Post Office. "Frank Peterson's on the town council," he explained. "If anyone knows about the teaching position, he will." Inside, they found a jovial man with impressive whiskers arranging bolts of fabric on a shelf. His eyes widened at the sight of Levi. "Turner, twice in 1 month must be some kind of record," he boomed. His gaze shifted to Rebecca with undisguised curiosity. "Frank, this is Rebecca Montgomery," Levi said. "She's inquiring about the teaching position." Frank's face brightened. "Well now, that's providential timing. Council meeting just last week about finding a new teacher before winter sets in. You got experience, Miss Montgomery?" "5 years teaching in Philadelphia," Rebecca replied. "All ages, though I particularly enjoy the younger children." Frank rubbed his hands together. "Perfect. Our last teacher couldn't handle the older boys, but something tells me you've got more steel in your spine." Rebecca smiled, warming to his enthusiasm. "I've managed my share of reluctant scholars, Mr. Peterson. School's been closed 2 months now," Frank continued. "Parents are getting restless having the children underfoot all day. When could you start?" The directness of the question took Rebecca aback. Well, immediately, I suppose. But don't you need references or to consult the council?" Frank waved a dismissive hand. "I can vouch for you if Turner brought you. That's good enough for Silver Creek." Rebecca glanced at Levi, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "There's a room available above the dress shop," Frank added. "Nothing fancy, but clean and private. Comes with the teaching position, along with a modest salary." By mid-afternoon, Rebecca had been introduced to the mayor, shown the schoolhouse, and installed in her new lodgings a small but pleasant room with a view of the mountains. The town matrons had immediately taken her under their wing, promising to spread word that school would resume on Monday. As the sun began its descent, Levi brought the last of her trunks up the narrow staircase to her room. "Seems you've landed on your feet," he observed, setting it down beside the bed. "Thanks to you," Rebecca said, suddenly aware that their paths would now diverge. The thought left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. "I should head back," Levi said, shifting his weight. "Cattle need tending." Rebecca nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. I can't thank you enough for everything, Mr. Turner." "Levi," he corrected softly. "Levi," she echoed. "I hope. That is, if you're ever in town." "I'll check on you," he promised. "Make sure you're settling in." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs. Rebecca moved to the window, watching as he untied his wagon and climbed onto the seat. Just before he flicked the reins, he looked up at her window. Their eyes met briefly, then he turned away, guiding the wagon back toward the road that would take him home. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Rebecca threw herself into preparing the schoolhouse, meeting parents and children, and learning the rhythms of her new community. Silver Creek proved welcoming, the residents grateful to have a teacher for their children and seemingly unconcerned about her sudden appearance or lack of connections. Yet despite the warmth of her reception and the satisfaction of returning to teaching, Rebecca found herself watching the road leading out of town, hoping to glimpse a familiar wagon. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Levi Turner. "He keeps to himself, that one," Mrs. Peterson told her when she finally worked up the courage to ask after him. "Always has, since he settled here 5 years back. Good man, though fair in his dealings and generous when someone's in need." Rebecca nodded, thinking of his quiet kindness to her. "Does he come to town often?" Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly. "Once a month usually for supplies, though Frank mentioned he's been by twice already this month, which isn't like him at all." The following Saturday, Rebecca was arranging books on the schoolhouse shelves when a shadow darkened the doorway. She turned to find Levi standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Levi!" she exclaimed, unable to contain her delight. "Come in, please." He stepped inside, glancing around at the transformed schoolroom with its freshly scrubbed desks and new charts on the walls. "Place looks different. Amazing what soap and determination can accomplish," she laughed. "The children have been wonderful helpers. We've had school for a week now, and already I can see progress." "Town's pleased to have you," he said, his eyes settling on her face. "You look well." Rebecca felt warmth rising in her cheeks under his steady gaze. "I am well, happy to be teaching again. And you? How are things at the ranch?" "Same as always." A pause. "Quiet." The word hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. "I brought something," Levi said suddenly, reaching into his coat. He produced a small, wrapped package. "For the school." Rebecca accepted it curiously, unwrapping the brown paper to reveal a beautifully crafted wooden box containing colored chalks. "Oh, Levi," she breathed. "These are wonderful. The children will be thrilled. We've been making do with just white chalk. Ordered them from San Francisco," he explained, a hint of color touching his tanned face. "Thought they might be useful." The gesture touched her deeply. That he had gone to such trouble for her students, when his own resources were surely limited, spoke volumes about his character. "Will you stay for dinner?" she asked impulsively. "Mrs. Johnson at the boarding house always makes far too much food on Saturdays." To her surprise, he nodded. "I'd like that." That dinner marked the beginning of a new pattern. Every Saturday, Levi would ride into town, ostensibly for supplies, but always finding his way to the schoolhouse or Rebecca's lodgings. Sometimes they would walk along the creek that gave the town its name, Levi pointing out wildlife or telling her stories of the land. Other times they would simply sit on the porch of the boarding house, talking until the sun set behind the mountains. As autumn deepened into winter, Rebecca found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet rancher. Unlike Henry's empty promises or the shallow attentions of men she'd known in Philadelphia, Levi's actions revealed his true nature: honorable, thoughtful, and steadfast. For Levi, each visit to Silver Creek brightened days that had grown increasingly solitary over the years. He found himself thinking of Rebecca's laugh as he worked his ranch, or remembering the animated way she described her students' progress. His home, once a haven, now felt empty when he returned to it alone. The townsfolk noticed their growing attachment, exchanging knowing glances when Levi's wagon appeared each Saturday. Mrs. Peterson took to inviting them both for Sunday dinner after church, while Frank pointedly mentioned the abandoned Weaver property that adjoined Levi's ranch, a fine piece of land with a good house, just needing a family. As the first snow of winter dusted Silver Creek, Levi arrived not on Saturday but on Friday evening, just as Rebecca was locking the schoolhouse. "Levi," she said in surprise, "is everything all right?" "Storm's coming," he explained, gesturing toward the darkening sky. "Big one from the look of it. Wanted to make sure you had supplies laid in." His concern warmed her more than any fire could have. Mrs. Johnson has been stockpiling food for weeks. I think she's secretly hoping we'll be snowed in, so she can try out all her recipes on her boarders. Levi smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Smart woman. They walked together toward the boarding house, the air between them comfortable yet charged with unspoken feelings. Will you stay in town tonight? Rebecca asked as snowflakes began to fall more heavily. The storm seems to be arriving sooner than expected. Levi glanced toward the mountains, now obscured by lowering clouds. Might be wise. They reached the boarding house just as the wind picked up, driving snow in swirling patterns along the street. Inside, Mrs. Johnson fussed over them both, insisting Levi stay for dinner and accept her last vacant room. That evening, as the storm raged outside, the boarding house residents gathered in the parlor. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and soon music filled the room. When the impromptu band struck up a waltz, Levi surprised Rebecca by offering his hand. I'm not much of a dancer, he admitted quietly as they moved around the room. You're doing wonderfully, she assured him, acutely aware of his hand at her waist and his eyes never leaving her face. Later, as the music slowed and others drifted off to their rooms, Levi and Rebecca found themselves alone by the fireplace. I've been thinking, he began, his voice low and serious, about the future. Rebecca's heart quickened. Oh, my place is too far from town for you to teach if you live there, he said, the words coming carefully as if he'd rehearsed them. But the Weaver property that adjoins my land, it's just 3 miles from Silver Creek. Easy riding distance. Rebecca held her breath, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning. I've made an offer on it, he continued. Frank's handling the sale. It's a good house, bigger than mine. Needs some work, but the bones are sound. Levi, she whispered, her voice catching. He took her hands in his eyes serious in the firelight. I know it hasn't been long, Rebecca, and I'm not a man of many words, but these past months, having you in my life, it's made me realize how empty it was before. Tears pricked at Rebecca's eyes as joy welled within her. My life too. I can't promise it will be easy, he warned. Ranch life is hard, especially for someone not raised to it. But I can promise to work every day to make you happy, if you'd consider, yes, she interrupted, squeezing his hands. Yes, Levi Turner, I would most definitely consider becoming your wife. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her a tender, questioning kiss that held the promise of deeper passion. When they parted, Rebecca laughed softly. Do you realize this is the most you've spoken to me at one time since we met? Levi chuckled, the sound rumbling from deep in his chest. Got a lot of words saved up. Might take a lifetime to say them all. I look forward to hearing every one, she whispered, leaning in for another kiss. The storm that night marked the beginning of the harshest winter in recent memory, with snow piling high around Silver Creek for weeks. Yet for Rebecca and Levi, it passed in a golden haze of deepening love. They were married in the town church on Christmas Eve, with all of Silver Creek in attendance. Frank Peterson gave away the bride, while Mrs. Johnson wept openly throughout the ceremony, declaring it the most romantic thing since my Harold proposed 40 years ago. Spring arrived with the promise of new beginnings. The Weaver house, now the Turner home, had been transformed under their combined efforts, with Levi's craftsmanship and Rebecca's eye for comfort creating a home neither could have imagined alone. Rebecca continued teaching, riding the short distance to town each morning on a gentle mare Levi had trained especially for her. In the afternoons, she would return to work alongside her husband, learning the ways of ranch life with determination if not always immediate success. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Rebecca rested her head on Levi's shoulder. "I've been thinking about that day at the train station," she mused. "How desperate I felt when I realized Henry wasn't coming." Levi's arm tightened around her. "Best thing that never happened to you." Rebecca laughed. "Indeed. But do you know what I remember most clearly? You didn't say a word about where we were going or why you were helping me. You just loaded my trunks and took me home. Wasn't much for talking back then," he admitted. "And yet," she said softly, lifting her face to his, "in that silence was the beginning of everything important." Levi kissed her, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing yet never lost its wonder. Who would have thought finding an abandoned woman at a train station would lead to this? Rebecca smiled against his lips. "Providence works in mysterious ways, Mr. Turner." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with wordless acts of kindness, leading to destinations the heart recognizes as home long before the mind can name them.